So this first session, which will be From Data to Action, Transforming Ocean Health, Nature and Prosperity, which is sponsored by Hub Ocean, will provide an update from the UN Decade for Ocean Science. We're very excited to have the Executive Secretary from the IOC UNESCO, Vidar Helgesen, to join us among the panelists there. But first, it is my great honor to introduce His Royal Highness, Prince Haakon of Norway, to the stage to provide his welcome address.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to repeat this now. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be part of this session here today where ocean data takes center stage. I always enjoy reading the annual Economist publication, The World Ahead, which is separate from the Economist Impact. And for 2025, there were once again many interesting publications written by knowledgeable editors, journalists, and researchers. I would like to thank The Economist for its contributions, which encourage reflection and enhance insight based on facts and science. Your work is more important than ever, I would say. One article in particular stands out: Wild Cards. A selection of 10 unbelievable sounding things that could happen in 2025. 2 of them being a sports tournament encouraging doping and animals that get their own bank account. As we have already seen, 2025 is full of surprises, and we don't know what lies ahead. This is where today's topic, ocean data, comes in. Because we're not talking about wild cards here. We are talking about data and facts. And most importantly, data and facts that are reliable and available. The UN report showed that the rise in global temperature and associated ecological changes are having a severe impact on the oceans. The good news is that ocean data can help us to develop the solutions needed to remedy the situation. We do need to ensure a balance between different uses of the ocean without sacrificing ocean health. Not only at the national level, but also at the regional and global levels. And just as importantly, we need to share our data and our knowledge and make sure it is used. Norway invests in ocean data compilation and participates in almost all international infrastructures in the field. But like the UN and the EU, Norway recognizes that building the necessary knowledge base and collecting and disseminating data are not tasks that the public sector can or should do on its own. Private initiatives also have an important role to play. And while the ocean economy generates vast amounts of data, much of it remains fragmented and underused. And this is a missed opportunity. Today's session brings together leaders across sectors, in science as well as in business. Data in the link between action and impact. So we must make sure that we use it. We must put the data to work to protect nature, increase prosperity, and to ensure that our oceans remain a source of life for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. Again, it's a great honor to have you here. I know you're a long-standing advocate for the ocean. And yes, perfect framing as well for this next session, as you say, on data. So if I can invite up to the stage my speakers, I'm going to move over here and have my speakers come here. And if I can ask, please, Toro Kubu, who's the Senior Director of Climate Change Resilience and Environment at the Asian Development Bank. Toro, thank you very much. Right here. Kimberly Matheson, Chief Executive of Hub Ocean. Kimberly. Jan Huckner, Jan, Secretary General of One Ocean Foundation. And then last but certainly not least, Vidar Helgesen, Executive Secretary of IOC. And Vidar, I've put you there strategically because I know you have to leave us early. Yes, so you can make a quick escape. Oh, Matthew, I'm so sorry. No worries. You said it's more strategic. Matthew kindly stepped in at the last minute this morning, and clearly it slipped my mind. Matthew, I'm so sorry. Matthew is a board member. Matthew's the board member of Mission Ocean at the European Commission. So, okay, right. So Vidar, since you do have to do this early, I did want to kind of focus on your perspective to get it started. And also, I think it's a natural introduction, right? We're sort of halfway through the decade of ocean science. Can you give us an update? Where are we at? Where have you seen great progress? Where do you still have progress to make?
We're seeing, it's a great question, I just need to say that. We're seeing great progress in the recognition of the importance of the ocean. We're seeing great progress in initiatives and commitments for the ocean. We're seeing more multilateral frameworks put in place for the ocean. The last decade hasn't been a golden era for multilateralism, but in the ocean domain, we've actually seen surprising progress. We did the agreement, the Montreal Biodiversity Framework, the agreement at least to negotiate plastics treaty, even if it's a difficult process. Nevertheless, the ocean is not doing well. Ocean change is accelerating, it's accelerating for the worse, and that leaves us with two imperatives. One is that the ocean activities that are contributing to ocean degeneration need to halt. And the ocean activities that can contribute to ocean health need to be scaled up. And both of those dimensions need to be captured in better planning for a sustainable ocean economy. For that, we need data. The other dimension is, with a changing ocean comes new ocean hazards. All weather starts in the ocean. That means all extreme weather starts in the ocean. To better predict extreme weather events, we need more ocean observation and more data. And then other hazards, marine heat waves that we see increasingly frequent, invasive species, harmful algal blooms, and a range of other threats in the ocean, sudden ecosystem collapse, etc. We need early warning in order not least for the most exposed and most vulnerable countries to be able to prepare better. And for that, we need ocean observation and ocean data. And the current trajectory, regrettably, is that over the next years, we're going to see a dramatic decline in ocean observing activities from the government sector, unless something is done. Obviously, this has been exacerbated in the very recent weeks and months with the budgets coming out of Washington, D.C., which means we need other countries to step up, but we also need the private sector to step up. And let me close this with one example. We are home to the Global Ocean Observing System, and on the basis of that, a number of data products. We're home to the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. 3%, and Hub Ocean has actually found this number, 3% of the data we have in the Ocean Biodiversity Information System comes from the private sector. Half of that comes from one country, which is Norway, and that's due to regulatory frameworks. The actors on the Norwegian continental shelf are forced to share data. So it proves that regulation matters, but then the private sector can also do a lot on its own. And I'm really grateful for the ambitions that we're seeing coming out of this, including this meeting.
And what is your key message then to national governments and private companies, both to sort of galvanize them? But do they have the data? They're just hesitant to release it, or do they need to invest and take more effort to gather that data?
They have much of that data. Again, an example, our partnership to map the global seabed. We've mapped so far 26.11%. If existing private sector data were to be shared overnight, we would likely be up at the double, about 50%. We don't know, of course, because the data is locked away, but there is a considerable amount of data that can be shared, and which can be shared without jeopardizing commercial or security interests.
And so is that is the main barrier to that sharing, is concern around commercial security issues?
No, there's bureaucracy, there is convenience, there is unawareness. I mean, there's a lot of explanations behind this. I think the awareness of the importance of ocean data is insufficient. We know about it in the ocean community, but if you go to a minister or a CEO of some company, you might not be aware that ocean data actually is important, not only for science, and not primarily for science. It's important for coastal communities, it's important for business. And that's why we're also mobilizing not only governments to step up their efforts, but also commercial actors. On this Friday, we're launching, together with the WMO and the IMO, a campaign called 10,000 Ships for the Ocean, which is aiming at mobilizing commercial ships to observe the ocean and share data onto our global ocean observing platform. It's just one of several initiatives we need to take going forward to mobilize the private sector, on top of mobilizing governments. This morning I had a meeting with some key member states and the European Commission about exactly how we can step up efforts in the wake of the downwards trend we're seeing. And the downwards trend we're seeing because the US is sponsoring so much currently for global ocean observing, so others need to get to the table and get to action.
And you would think, in terms of all the technological advancements we're seeing in recent years, that it should be quite easy to get to that 10,000 ships.
Technologically, it would definitely not be a huge challenge. Financially, I would say it's also a fairly modest challenge compared to the risks of not doing it. Ocean observing is critical to maritime security. And so it's a combination of self-interest and shared interest to mobilize. And we have very important shipping companies that have signed up for our launch on Friday. And that's only the start. It's a process that will take forward from here.
Yeah. And really, I wonder if I can bring you in here. How do you, from your vantage point at Hub Ocean, how does the sort of ambitions and actions around Hub Ocean, how do they match to industrial data practices? And how do we encourage businesses to see the business value of this data as well?
So I think Vidar gave a really nice summary. I would focus, in order to involve business, I would focus on previously, in some sense, the absence of incentives, and now moving into more incentives for business to get involved. The absence of incentives, I mean, let's face it, our ocean industries have often been able to use the ocean for free, right? In a lot of cases, it's hard for businesses to actually make a business case to focus on, for example, biodiversity impact. And so the landscape, though, there's reasons to be optimistic because the landscape is changing from many, many, many angles. Reporting requirements have in fact been a very important part of creating incentives for businesses to act. They need to mandatorily report on more, so that's driving demand for increased ocean knowledge, a hunger to understand if you're a ship, if you're a windmill, what type of impact, right, you're having on the environment and reporting it. Voluntary disclosures, though, are beginning to even ramp up as we're having a struggle as a world to sort of continue to push forward mandatory regulations. It's certainly in some parts of the world, it's not getting easier, but the voluntary bits are taking over. And why are they taking over? Initiatives, voluntary ones like TNFE, are helping us push forward and give incentives. Why? Because there's real risks for the financial sector to invest in companies, right? There's real financing that companies need. If companies are incentivized from a bank, that you can have a lower interest rate for damaging biodiversity less, if you can make investments and actually recoup that, those are really powerful incentives. If investors choose to invest in your company versus pull back, see you at the bottom of the barrel, literally, or see you as forward-leaning and investing, that's less risk for them to do, right? And a lot of businesses are starting to experience that their customers demand and want, right, services that are lower carbon, or that guarantee that fewer whales have been struck by a ship that's carrying an electric vehicle that a consumer might buy. Those types of incentives and inquiries are also creating good incentives for business to act. And so as we approach companies to share data, we're looking at both the sharing sides, and we're seeing, for example, the oil and gas industry. We've got very important examples like Aker BP, Total Energies, that are leaning forward to share net ocean data. That's weather data, temperature, salinity, waves, etc. Previously, that data's been lying kind of dormant, not unlocked. So telling them how important it is for science, but also all of those other incentives that start to come in, begin to unlock that data. We've got seismic companies, right? Unlocking TGS, PGS, unlocking mammal observations, increasing dramatically by one company off the coast of Brazil, increasing what we have for mammal observations in the OBIS database by 50%. One company, one part of the world, unlocking that data, right? And they've had a pledge, TGS and PGS, for a long time as part of their reputation, their commitments to sustainability. But what they can get out of it, for example, is if they can have better all-in models about when they run their operations. Disturbing mammals less is also good business. When you have to stop a seismic operation underway, it's very costly. So we can all look for the incentives that in the operations of the business, in financing of the business, or customers of the business, we begin to look for these 360 benefits. And getting that flywheel going serves everyone well.
So Jan, I want to bring you in as well. Your Ocean Impact Initiative, you aim to turn data into metrics. I know you're mainly focused on not necessarily data coming from the ocean, but still data around the ocean impact. But how do you make science legible for the boardroom? How do you convey the importance of data?
Well, I think first we really have to sort of try to divide it. There's two things that have to happen in parallel. One is sort of the ocean data, right? And then the impact that we're having on the ocean. So I think it's two different things. One is collecting the data, like we just heard, like, the private sector should step in to divide all the data that's out there. It's absolutely necessary for science and to take strategic decisions. The other one is impact data. We're focusing on impact data, impact by the industry. And I think in the future decision process, science should always be more and more on the board table when we take decisions. Because what we see is, we started this initiative 5 years ago, and we started to look at it from a purely scientific perspective. What are the different impacts that industries have on the ocean? And it's fairly complicated because obviously every industry has different sorts of impact. And you can't compare one industry to the other industry because you have, by the EU directives, you have 11 ocean pressures. Every industry has different pressures on the ocean. And if you have to look at science to really, science has to be the main driver on all of this. And I think, as Kimberly Wright pointed out, the financial sector, I think, is big because you look at it from a risk perspective when you do investments. And what we see is, number one, is a huge awareness gap. The awareness gap, just to give an example, we did in 2023, we did a huge sample of 2,500 companies that represent together more than the world's 70% of the world's GDP. and what they are actually reporting in their non-financial non-financial balance sheets on ocean, on SDG 14, on ocean impact. And the percentage was less than 9%. We're talking about the big players, like the really big players out there. We took the top 100 listed of the 20th biggest stock exchange, plus 500 ocean-specific fishing that would show up in that. And so, what does this tell us? That there is a huge gap of awareness. Many times, look out there on the industries. Most of them are moving now, finally, on CO2 and on the emissions, but they don't make that link of how important that same emission investments are also referred to ocean. So you could actually, with no cost, you could report on SDG 14, and they don't do it yet. So I think this link is missing. When we talk about, many times you talk about climate change, but is that message really out there that you cannot talk seriously about climate change without considering the ocean and the impact on the ocean? That covers 70% of our planet.
Yeah.
And so I think, and what I'd like to point out is the opportunity for these businesses. When we talk about the board table, look at it as an opportunity, because if you see that only 9% of the biggest players report anything on ocean, if I want to differentiate myself from the competition, I would jump on this immediately.
Yeah.
Because that's where you can really differentiate yourself.
So I think, so we've covered a little bit of the sort of business perspective around opportunity, so we'll bring in the kind of bit more kind of government perspective, and maybe Matthew, I'll come to you. And can you talk a little bit about, obviously there was announcements made about the EU Ocean Pact, and what is the Commission doing in terms of helping to kind of incentivize the gathering of ocean observation data?
Thanks, Jonathan. We're at a turning point with Mission Ocean actually at the moment, and as you rightly highlighted, this year has really been a time for focus and for a sensation of empowering ourselves. The mission itself is at a halfway point where we've gone from testing to scale up and implementation. And it's a really different way of approaching sharing experience and data throughout the European Union and the other partners that are involved in it as well. So it's much more dynamic and less people stuck inside a box than your classic sort of Horizon program, where there's a project end cycle, we turn it off, and that's the end. So what we're looking for now is a transformational moment where we can have data with longevity, with eModNet and with the digital twin as well, that has interoperability and usability with use cases. Now this is a really, we're in our baby steps. Technologically right now, we're at a turning point. In terms of, I'm talking, equivalent to the steam engine moment, if you like. We have at our fingertips a situation where science is fundamentally vital, but we've got tools now. I'm not going to say the word AI because I don't believe it exists at the moment, but we have some modeling tools at our fingertips now which reflect the dynamic change which is happening so rapidly now that by the time people have published a scientific paper, the disaster has already happened. We need data tools that are reflective of valorization of data, of use cases, from the most vulnerable person on the planet to the most important security situation that relates to sovereignty. We have these tools for visualization, for application, and I want to tell you a story that's related to the reason why I sit on the board, actually, the European Commission for Mission Ocean. It's a fantastic story about a transformational change in one country, the Philippines. And they're going through a sort of a complete rethink of how they want to manage their resources and how they want to manage their security and their sovereignty over their EEZ. They've gone from and we all suffer from this, especially in the maritime sector. We have legislation and management which is not adaptive. It's very, very binary and polar. We ban this, we do this, but we're working in a very dynamic system. The ocean reflects connectivity, people being connected. It reflects change. If you've ever steered a boat with a tiller, the ocean will push against you. And we need adaptive management like this. We need to be reflective, and we need reflective practice in our data as well. So we visualize change. And as human beings, we love to have a static, comfortable, safe place. But if you go out in the ocean, you never have that. And we're in a runaway situation here. So in the Philippines, they decided to implement a law called PENCAS. And PENCAS is a fundamental step in data interoperability between government departments. It means that the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquaculture can talk to the Department of the Environment. It means that the Coast Guard can also use that and share that data. Security services can also share that data. What they tried to do, though, was cut and paste the system process. And what I've worked on over the past years is trying to look for use cases and standard operating procedures which are far more reflective of cultural practice, of the most vulnerable people's needs, of biodiversity, and also all the multidimensional concepts that relate to oceans and the change that people are facing now. Because they've been facing climate change in a very, very severe form for many, many years with typhoon landfalls, for example. And they have much more experience than we do, for example, in the Mediterranean, in Europe, coping and culturally coping as well with the data and with the impact that it has in terms of risk, resilience, insurance. And it makes much more sense to them to valorize that biodiversity data. How much is a mangrove worth? Well, there's a village behind it with 4,000 people living there. If the surge wave comes, the mangrove is going to protect them. It's going to protect their boats, provide a safe harbor for their boats, so that they can go fishing the next day, feed themselves, for example. Or they have dive industry, and they make millions of dollars from flying people in to go diving. We're at this fundamental point, basically, with machine learning and data visualization, where I'm not saying we can cut out science, but we need to rethink the method with which we approach and visualize the data. And it needs to have a much faster turnaround time, so that it's accessible as well and has multi-valorization.
Okay, that's very important. Thank you, Matthew. You want to respond to that?
Yes, because this is true to science, but this holds true for governments as well. We all need and want evidence-based decision making, but the truth is, evidence-based decision making in governments is too slow. And when governments make rapid decisions, they're often not that evidence-based. And I speak from experience. The normal process is you establish an expert commission to study an issue for 2 or 3 years. The government, the minister receives it at a solemn ceremony. The government puts it out on a public consultation. Another year passes. And that's after mulling it over whether they want to put it out on a consultation. When the consultation is ready, it's being chewed over by good bureaucrats for another good period of time. Then the government decides, are we going to put something in our budget? Are we going to put forward a legislative act? And at the end of this process, things have changed in reality. So we need a much more dynamic interrelationship between knowledge communities and decision-making processes. We need that in business, but they're better at it. We definitely need that in politics as well. There's much talk about innovation in different ways. Political innovation is not so often talked about, but we really need that, especially facing an accelerating ocean crisis.
Yeah. Do you think, you have to go soon? I know we're about to leave you, lose you, Vidar. Maybe
I thought she was applauding me. But
yeah, no, me too. Just before you go, what do you hope to achieve in respect to data? As what do you hope to be an outcome of the conference this week with respect to data?
I think this conference doesn't have a binding declaration or anything, but I think awareness is extremely important.
Yeah.
And then the meeting of minds and the meeting of important actors that can agree to do good stuff. I mean, the meeting I had with member states this morning, which was called on short notice to tell them, hey, we have a problem. We need more actors to step up. A meeting like this. And then just one final point. I'm hoping 2 weeks from now when the IOC Assembly is gathering, we are putting forward to our member states a proposal that they need to put in place requirements for data sharing, because if private companies have data from an EEZ, the government needs to approve it, and governments therefore need to approve it.
Thank you very much, Vidar. I know you have to go. Thank you very much. You're all hands as well. Thank you very much. so we still have about 35 minutes for this panel. I am, for that last so 10 to 15 minutes, I am going to open up to you, the audience. So please do be thinking about your questions and comments that you want to have with the panel. Arturo, I'm going to bring you in, obviously. So finance has already been mentioned, obviously. It's critical for data in making finance. From your vantage point of the Asian development bank, what are you doing? How are you using data? How are you incentivizing the gathering of data with your investment?
Right, well, thank you. So thanks to Matthew, and I echo what he said, and that is exactly what we're trying to do. So taking science and the data associated with it, and then overlaying and using it to analyze the economic case, because public policy is made on economic assessments and decisions, efficient application of public capital. And then finance. So this is the financial return calculation for commercial viability. So there's a big step going from economic viability to financial viability. So we're trying to bring in the externalities and internalize that to the extent possible. So who are the downstream beneficiaries? That so for example, we talked about ecotourism. So if you do invest in wastewater treatment and you improve the ocean health, then you are going to be able to sustain that revenue from ecotourism, and also a healthy fish stock catch. So, for example, Matthew also talked about the Philippines. Well, we're based in the Philippines, so we experience the extreme climate, but also there are communities that are completely dependent on tourism revenues, and they have to diversify, of course. But there is a very clear business case to partner with upstream players who are polluting the oceans. So when we see the innovation in digital tools, for example, fintech, before you had too many intermediaries, aggregators, and the downstream beneficiaries, by the time you tried to make that payment, the upstream computers, you lost the value. But now you can immediately pay using mobile systems, right? So in this Gcash. So this is really taking what happened in Latin America, Costa Rica, payment for ecosystem services to a whole new dimension to scale that down. So what we want to do is go from science, go to economic assessment, go to financial assessment, and then visualization that was already mentioned. Vidar mentioned that quick decisions are not just but also quick decisions are not inclusive. We are talking about people, communities around the ocean. So what we want to do is we want to make information visual, available,
and accessible by those local
communities. We also want to have what we call Explorer. So we've been developing something called a disaster risks analytics explorer, where you can actually play around with the parameters that go in which climate scenario, which asset type, which critical infrastructure, the water supply systems, energy supply systems, the key roads, transport modes like the health centers and the clinics, right, for people to access when disaster hits. And then you can surround that sort of visual, and let's say a digital twin, with the key stakeholders, and then play around, discuss on the parameters, and say, this is the best allocation that we need to make to protect these communities for the term. So many of you probably know that Singapore is the first country that has a digital twin for the entire country. We have been trying this, so with Tonga, Vanuatu, and Cook Islands. We spent multiple years on collecting data, primary data and secondary data. We've now put that together into a digital twin format for people to come around. Now then, the next step is, can we galvanize all the players in the market so that we contribute, because you get the benefit of aggregation and partnerships through this kind of model. And then you get the allocation of resources. Like reinsurance is pulling out the Pacific and many Southeast Asian countries because you can't afford the premiums. Well, what if public decision making is targeting that so you can protect the most vulnerable coastal areas through gray and green infrastructure to bring that risk premium down from extreme cases. Then you can retain the reinsurance industry and of course insurance market quite vibrant. So
That's really great. In terms of the sort of digital capabilities, is this something that you're working with big tech companies? Are they supporting you on that, or is this capabilities that you're able to develop in the commission or in the ADB?
No way. So we partner with Amazon Web Services, with Google, with KPMG Digital Village. So on the digital twin, we are partnering with ETA Zurich Digital Twin Lab, which is based in Singapore. You know, it took 2 years to develop a digital twin before, but now it's like 2 months because of all the underlay data and programming we can benefit.
Is there data missing from that?
Oh, absolutely.
We need to continually sort of fold in new data points.
So in the developing country context, like this Tonga, really took 2 years. And by the time we collected the data, it's outdated, right? It's out because it's evolving so fast. So we want to, like, so the downscaling of models that are, because there's not enough flight, the countries can't afford, you know, flying a plane and like slider information with that. So how do we harness all of this advancement in satellite information, which increasingly has different, sort of, you know, lighter data capabilities. What we do is we're trying to bring in, and some said not using AI, but we are trying to use these advancements in computer processing through the work stream. So first work stream is we're using AI to immediately tell us what data is available in the public space and what data is in the proprietary space. And then we can immediately tell the gaps that we need to collect or whether there can be development financing to cover the cost of a subscription to that proprietary data, right? Then we can bring all external partners to focus on that real gap. So that's one thing. Next is you collect the data, and then there's a whole industry out there, many of you may be from the insurance industry, it's called cat models, right? That's good models. You know, we know that, but insurance only uses that to affordable areas where they can make a business out of it. Those cat models, they're 5, 6, they have very peculiar data input needs. Before you needed an army of data scientists. Now you can use the power of AI to take the data that's available and then alter the format so it can plug into the cat model beyond where it's viable and into the public space. So that's another thing we're trying to do. And then visualization, and then explore playing scenarios, and finally
So you point to a really important kind of layer of data that's really in the middle. And you describe data that you pulled from the region. There's always a need for more data, but what we often find is we know some of the data in these big addresses, these big sort of what VDAR refers to, Opus and GBIT and so forth. You need those global data sets. You need the satellite data. It's often available from one or the other good source at that level. But then you need to go very, very, very local and build trust and bring together the data that in fact is stranded, is locked, no one's ever heard of it. And that's a magical technical exercise and opportunity, but it's also a deeply trust-building exercise. So I just wanted to also reinforce your point around the technology stack and the need. HubOcean has been building for 4 years a geospatial platform. It happens to be built on another one of the big clouds. I worked for Microsoft for many years. That was actually my entry into becoming the head of this foundation, taking that technological background with me. But being able to say, you're going to need hefty clouds in this world, but you're going to have to overlay those with deep ocean domain experience. And you're going to have to extend from, right, the IT room all the way through to, right, people on the ground who really have that data, understand, and get folks involved. Our ambition, 4 years in building, I'm here to tell you it is not an easy task to make data from the world at all of those resolutions and levels talk together. but we're trying to make a hefty contribution to become, if you will, an interconnecting data asset for the world, digital public infrastructure that helps bring so many of these cases together, so that every research project, so that every country project, particularly those very little resourced, right? Every marine protection project, industry project, has another option available to them in connecting tissue, which can speed everyone up from those basic tasks which are repeated so many times around all of these projects and countries, right? To bring together either global or local, we can make a significant uplift and an accelerator into getting a lot of data that can now talk together. Driving out redundancy, using our precious funds, Vidar said they are precious funds. We're getting less funding for the moment, we need more funding. We cannot afford to have everyone building digital infrastructure around the world. So it's so important that we think interoperable, we utilize these shared assets. It's just really critical.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that in terms of, like, you know, are you, as the Commission, Ocean Mission Commission, working with ADB, to what extent are you all coordinating on the creation of kind of shared data and data infrastructure capabilities, or is there a risk that their digital twins would be developed in kind of in silos?
The very ethos of the mission actually is that connectivity, and that eModNet is a centre where people can contribute and bring data together and share it and share ideas as well. Like I said, it's not a broom cupboard project. It's you know, there's a big social component in terms of knowledge sharing, innovation, sensor development as well, and deployment. And I have to say that along with this sort of moment that we're in where we've got huge potential to do problem solving with AI, I'll call it if you want.
So you don't think, wait, I don't want to go on a tangent, but you don't think we wouldn't even call what we have now AI?
I don't think it's a sentient being, no. I think we're making it. AI traditionally is a sentient being. It's machine learning and modeling and neural networks and all the fantastic code that's behind that for companies like NVIDIA. And it's not a sentient being, it's people doing things.
But you think we will have AI as a sentient being?
I don't know. I can't predict the future.
Just seeing.
Yes. But what
Yes,
I think,
it is. Yeah.
sorry. What I think it offers though is a really is a moment where we need to increase sensor capacity and lower the cost of gathering the data. I'll give you one example. I can give you a couple of examples. There was a gentleman that I was working with recently related to Mission Ocean, and he was telling me that he can detect passively using a very small wind-powered unit at the surface, and comparing the data from that camera on that little boat with RGB satellite data, which is readily available, and get a more realistic idea of the zooplankton population at the surface than if you go there with a huge boat and do a dragnet. And the cost of that data and the operational data compared to deploying the boat is minuscule. But the thinking behind it is a different way of thinking. And the way that he came up with the methodology was a reflective way of thinking about machine learning. And we've got things like niche modeling as well, which is a forecasting method for understanding how animals and species will behave as different parameters shift. So we can do some forecasting now and understand shifts and predict shifts that might happen, which we've never been able to do before, unless we do huge scale deployments, and then it's already happening. So we're at a magic moment really, and the resilience and the sustainability of those ideas is something which is fundamental in the mission and should be fundamental in terms of the responsibility, the corporate responsibility as well of burning fuel or however you generate your energy to actually do the number crunching. And it should come into play, but often I think there's a good trade-off.
Yeah, I just want to go back to your question and the point that came on data platforms, data layers. So we see it as a network of hubs and contributors. So many years ago, I was seconded from ADB to the UN Climate Change Secretariat, and Part of it was to design the Green Climate Fund, which is more known, but another one was the Climate Technology Center there. There was very much idea of having a global center and regional centers and a network of partners that contribute to that, because everybody believed in the power of aggregation and, of course, we call it the negatives of duplication, right? Like we're in a resource-constrained world. Now, so that has to be the model for data. However, another aspect of this is that when we go to the countries, I just came back from Pakistan last week, the countries will not just tap into a global cloud or some regional cloud. This is geospatial data and on critical infrastructure assets, asset value. That is about security. And so it's often controlled by Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Home Affairs. And you have to have that firewall where certain sort of parties and security issues and concerns that it may be used in an adverse way. So we have to actually work on the collaboration, but we have to be able to modularize that so that it comes into the country's system. And this is very much the capacity needed at every, we call developing member country level. How do you support that ability for them to maintain and bring the user interfaces together at the national decision-making level and pull a modularized system that updates and communicates so it's live with that global platform.
Protects the security.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is that the sort of dual use aspect? That's actually providing an opportunity to gather the data if you can get the right governance structure in place.
Yeah.
So Jan, I think you wanted to say something, and then I'll see if two other hands.
Okay. I just think we have a big opportunity here, talking about collaboration. And I go back a bit to the first thing that we mentioned about talking about ocean data, like scientific ocean data and data sharing, on what's happening, and to really sort of have that in real time, possibly, on a global scale. And the other thing is the data on impact, right? Because if we don't change the way we're doing things in the industries, all we see from the data, that's going to get worse. Okay, and so if we don't actually do something to improve and change the way where our industry is actually today working and the whole process is, then I think yes, obviously the data is going to be really important, but we actually have to change things. Okay, and that's where I'd like just to highlight that we have launched 2 days ago in Monaco. We have launched the Ocean Impact Initiative. And it's the first global science-based framework that analyzes the impact of industry on the ocean. And we were quite surprised when we started this journey. There was no, if you look at the different disclosure frameworks, data disclosure framework, there's nothing that really talks about ocean impact. And so we hope that this is really going to drive change within the industries, because all the issues that we're facing, and I'd like to sort of have a more holistic approach to it. We're not talking about ocean industry. A lot of time we talk about blue economy and refer to ocean industry. The impact on the ocean goes way beyond. We're talking about direct impact, we're talking about indirect impacts. Most of the times the ocean industry has direct impacts, but what really is very concerning also is the indirect impacts. Let's look at microplastics, okay, or climate change, basically, and acidity in the oceans. And so to have a tool for the first time that really can analyze on a company profile, what is the impact of my company, and have a benchmark of that industry for the first time, and really see also how that is hopefully improving in time, and match that, that's where I'm coming to the opportunity, have secondary data from the ocean data on what's happening, to actually have that comparison to measure the outcome. Not only what the company itself is valued, but actually have that secondary information to really prove that this is happening, and to hopefully see on a global scale that we are starting to do better and have less impact. I think that's the huge opportunity that we have. So matching these two things.
Yeah, really important.
I absolutely want to build on that in terms of, I feel like so much of what we focus on, we must focus on, is eventually to transform industry action and behavior so that we put less pressure on the ocean, right? That's why we work on so many of these things we work on. So I'll use that powerful word that was just forming, I feel, in my head at least, was transparency. Transparency is what we need at every turn, and I wanted to index to a couple of examples, other examples of getting better transparency for science, for governments, and from companies. I'd like to use one example of Aker Krill Company. This is a company that does something rather important in the world. They stand for 2/3 of all the krill that's fished out of the world in the Antarctica. So they understood from the beginning that unless they had transparency in their operations, they were very unlikely to have a free pass or a license to operate doing things that are so important in a crucial area. So transparency has been important from the start. As we partnered with them, they shared much more data that we transformed into forms that were fundamentally utilized and much better by regulators, by the Institutes of Marine Research of these countries that CAMLR, the regulator in this region, works together with. Getting 10 years of biomass data on krill out there, in addition to more and more that's coming, is incredibly helpful to get to and make sure that this company and all of the actors are not taking more krill than is going to give them a livelihood, and the whales and the penguins and everything else too on a permanent basis. And here we also have that data supporting this industry actor taking a very proactive role in championing a proposal which has been on the table a long time at CAMLR to get MPA done. D1 is the proposal that it's called. And here we have phenomenal industry leadership working together in a very transparent way, right? Again, with science and the regulators, cross-country discussions, et cetera, et cetera. This is the kind of transparency making that brings different sectors together and gets important things done. One other quick example, because Vidar was talking about countries and what they need to do more of. Look, we're trying to be loud about proposing that countries look at bidding processes very closely. When countries are going to award bids for offshore wind or aquaculture or fishing or any of these things, that they demand, insist, and regulate for open data sharing. It is such a fantastically important leverage point for industries to do that. And I want to point out the Netherlands government, who in their bids for offshore wind territories have been world leading in formalizing criteria not just for cost and supplier and everything else that's important in a offshore wind building zone, but to make sustainability criteria fundamental in who wins the bid. And guess what? That action by the Dutch government made several consortiums who were going for that bid turn to Hub Ocean and said, in order to strengthen our proposal to the government, we need to make a commitment to share all data transparently. In fact, we need to put more sensors on what the birds are doing and the bats are doing and the porpoises are doing at every stage of our building activities, and we need to share that with everybody in a way that they can use that data. We heard a rumor that you can do that, Hub Ocean. That's fantastic for everybody, because wind energy is much better, of course, but it isn't fantastic for the birds and the porpoises either, right? So the more we can get eyes on that, do that right, figure out what we invest in that makes a wind energy project as environmentally positive as it possibly can be, important stuff. Really, really, really good examples.
Great example. And surely that's really easy for governments then to do, right? To follow that example of the Dutch. Why wouldn't they?
Coming from a European Commission point of view, and going back to the dual use as well, and the sustainability of renewable. You know, we can write some legislation and draw a line, but animals will move between them. Going to the wind, some of the projects that you'll see from Mission Ocean and Blue Invest as well relate to sort of using wind also for aquaculture as well, and trying to build multi-dimensional use, so you can go and service the aquaculture and the wind at the same time, and often in optimum places and monitor the aquaculture alongside local biodiversity while it's being used. So there's all sorts of things going on there as well, which all relate to data gathering.
Yeah. Heard a lot from us, but we hear a bit from you. Any questions? I see a hand immediately up in the front here. Any other hands? Let's go to this gentleman here, and we'll just take this question, and then I'll hopefully start to see more hands I do. So this gentleman.
Thank you. Tony Di Natale. I work for several institutions as expert as well for the European Commission, for the UN, and I'm from the General Aquarium Foundation. I see that we are dealing always with different layers. The dreaming one, the legal one, and the real one.
What was the first one? Dreaming.
The dreaming one. And we need it, because we need to dream and trying to find solution for the future. The reality is quite hard, particularly in data sharing. I work in different international organizations and I know the issues. For instance, the European Commission several years ago established a data collection framework for the fishery data. The European Commission spent a lot of efforts and money. We are still trying to have the biological data since more than 20 years. We don't even know in which labs are sitting this data. And beside of many efforts and the obligation established by the law, because of strange things happening in many countries, in many labs, intellectual properties, scientific rights, and so on.
Right.
And this creating a very serious bias in the system, an incredible bias, which doesn't exist, for instance, for most of the oceanographic data.
Right.
So whenever we have to match the oceanographic data to some species, we are missing a part. And
So
plus,
the
there is another issue concerning a point raised by Kimberly, that whenever we have some output from sophisticated models, we have always to match these models with the current scientific knowledge. Sometimes things are not matching. Because they are matching from a mathematical point of view, but not from a scientific point of view.
So in that tension between sort of the timing, real-time data.
Not only this, sometimes things are going well from a mathematical point of view, but they are not matching the reality of the species.
Yeah.
So it's something different. And there are some other issues concerning, let's say, security and privacy. There are countries like US providing the data on a very large scale, 10 by 10, and then trying to connect this huge nets with small points. So there is a mismatch there.
Thank you very
It's
much.
the reality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Are we underplaying? Have we underplayed some of the challenges around some of the data sharing voices? Matthew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's a lot of academics that live in boxes and they don't want to share their data. It's appalling. They're funded by public money. And this mentality really needs to change. And they will either fall by the wayside as we shift, having stakeholders collect data with mobile phone apps on infrastructures that are implemented at government level. And they will miss the boat, to use the pun, because the systems will move ahead without them. And they need to listen to that and hear me say that, because I totally agree with you. It's appalling that they haven't contributed and we don't have that. eModLet is an opportunity for that data to be pooled and standardized, just like PENCAS in the Philippines. They're riding ahead with it, you know. And there's a lot of academics there that are willing to share their data, unlike people in the European Union, which is very strange, isn't it?
Yeah, this is exactly why we must make this process demand-driven. And if we're not making the link from the science, the data, to policy decision-making, and the data just dies, the science dies, then the sharing doesn't happen. So, you know, like I said, every country is different in their capacity. Like in the case of Pakistan, after the massive 2022 floods, they actually set up a national data sharing ID platform. The Prime Minister demanded to view the dashboard every 2 weeks, and have all the ministries, they integrated the data, and you could see the places with faster recovery from the flooding and those that are lagging behind. They came to us and other partners that said they're okay with that retrospective and the current status, but they want to use modeling for future decision making. In the Pacific, totally different story. They don't have that data. They don't even know what data is available. So they said, please help us with finding out what data is available, because they have such limited resources. They want to use that wisely and prioritize. And the inclusiveness of the process is also important. This is the, you have the, what do you call it, the credibility of the outcome, and then you have the credibility of the process. Nobody can properly predict the future. How do we know what scenario we're going to follow globally on climate change? What impact that would have on the Cook Islands? There's no way. So somebody making a decision on allocation of resources, they're going to be blamed in 20 years, 30 years. But if you have credibility of the process, you can visualize this, you can bring stakeholders together. We collectively made the decision taking into consideration these boundaries, then that is credible and you live with it because everyone was involved in making that.
Just a very quick point as well. I will produce no arguments which suggest that this is easy. But I will say, once upon a time I worked in spaces which were much, much harder, including healthcare data for curing cancer, for example. Talk about challenges to appropriately share data. Here's my ray of hope. Not all data by far in the ocean, the data that's valuable, not all of it is high resolution and super sensitive and requires governments approvals. But lots of fantastic information can and should flow. It's starting to flow more readily from research, from industry especially. So let's remember there's a ton of data out there, that there are approximately 0 barriers to sharing it now. And we are starting to see more of that. So, ray of hope in the challenging landscape.
I know we're very close to time. Gentlemen here, very quick, and then we're going to come to the panel.
Yeah, I agree with him about data. We were talking a lot about data, but we are in a kind of new wave here of industrialization in the ocean. So we need to work with the data we have. And with the data we have, I'm a scientist, with the data we have and the modeling we need to apply to that, we can have visions for the ocean. To save this 30% and to save the functionality, we can do it right now with the data we have. I disagree a little bit with what you say about several industrializations that are coming now. We are going to talk about the marine protected areas in a while, and in Europe we have predicted offshore wind farms inside marine protected areas. And you're talking about scientists that we are not completely in shape with that. So be careful with the way in which you industrialize or we industrialize the environment in the coming years, because water and oil doesn't mix. And I think we should try to establish clearly some visions, seascapings for the sea, in order to make decisions, because these quick decisions we were talking about sometimes can be distorted in the future. So be careful with that.
Thank you very much. So I just want to come to the panel for a final point, and maybe just one key takeaway for the audience, right? I feel like we had balanced discussion, perspective in terms of the challenges, but also pretty good high levels of hope, I'd say, especially for you, natural and others. But what's the sort of one takeaway? What do we need? What's one thing we need to kind of shift towards a more positive choice?
We need to be dynamically accepting change. We need to have a cognitive paradigm shift in the way that we think, so that we can reflectively act and implement real-world use cases. I agree with the gentleman there with the baseline data is great, but the zooplankton guy that I was working with gave me a completely different data set to the dragnets from the research vessel. So there is new data there, and we do need to be accepting of that data. Thank you.
Okay, just 2 messages. I think one, all the data collection shouldn't be an excuse to really make decisions now that we need, and protection is number one, I think, on the list. Protection, it's going to cost way less and it's much more easy than to repair on failures that we did. And I think that what I hear many times is they're almost trying to replicate the same mistakes that we did on Earth. Now we try to replicate it in the ocean. And we have to see that that this doesn't happen. It would be a disaster talking about deep sea mining, etc., etc. And two, if I may, biggest wish is that the industry itself becomes way more aware of their impact on the ocean and the role it plays on the ocean, even if it's not directly related to the ocean, textile.